Remove the medallion, Mr. Rusk, or I'll escalate this to fines and formal conduct review. Your wife's condition doesn't exempt you from visual conformity.
That's how Marion Vexley introduced herself to me. No greeting, no apology, just the cold recitation of power behind a steel door. Marion, vice chair of the Thornbend Hollow HOA, stood at the office threshold like she owned the whole damn mountain. Behind her, the heavy commercial-grade frame loomed open, casting a shadow over Vela's feet. "The clause you're referencing doesn't apply," I said flatly. "It's not part of the contract we signed. The medallion was never subject to revision. I have the time-stamped version on file. Would you like me to pull the hash verification from our realtor's archive?" Her eyes narrowed, but her mouth twitched, like she was already scanning for another rule to twist. That's the thing about people like Marion. They don't get nervous. They just recalculate. If you've ever lived in a place where power wears a cardigan and carries a clipboard, go ahead and subscribe. You're going to want to hear how this ends. My name is Galen Rusk. I'm a biomechanical accident reconstructionist. I don't argue with people like Marion. I measure them. I measure force, impact angles, torque limits. I'm called into courtrooms when bodies break and people lie. And right now, this woman is one safety infraction away from losing everything she thinks she controls. What happened next, I still replay like a crash video in reverse. Vela, my wife, stood behind me, one hand gently resting on the side of her belly, the other gripping my jacket. 31 weeks pregnant, already been through 2 miscarriages before this. The medallion Marion hated. It wasn't some plastic ornament from a roadside stall. It was a hand-fired ceramic sun, a wedding gift from Vela's grandmother, a relic from the old country. It used to hang over her mother's doorway. She put it above our porch planter the day we moved in, said it made the place feel like someone would live through the winter. But Marion didn't see warmth. She saw an infraction. As I turned to guide she away from the pointless conversation, Marion slammed the frame. The edge caught me in the shoulder, but I didn't feel it. I heard my wife cry, sharp, shocked, instantly swallowed by silence. Then I saw her stumble back, both arms wrapped around her belly like she was trying to hold the world together. I caught her just before her knees hit the concrete. The slab clicked shut behind us. For 2 seconds, the birds in the trees stopped. I remember that. The stillness, the metallic hum in my ears, the pressure of her fingernails digging into my arm. I've seen compound fractures, rollover ejections, even a helicopter blade failure during training. But I've never moved faster than I did in that moment. The emergency OB team at Ridgewell General met us at the curb. Fetal monitor, uterine scan, blood pressure off the charts, placental bruising, 7.2 centimeters across. The baby's heartbeat was strong, but the trauma was undeniable. I stayed quiet until the nurse left. Then I took out my field notebook, drew a rough map of her position, mine, and the doorway. I didn't need video. I had angles, force projection, deceleration curves. That slab was a commercial-grade slab. If the torque spring was set at anything above ADA-compliant resistance, Marion didn't just violate policy. She created a mechanical hazard. I knew exactly what I was going to do. But first, I needed to watch her squirm. 7 hours later, an HOA-wide email went out. According to Marion, she had interfered with authorized access to office space, and I had aggressively attempted entry during closed hours. She framed it like a security breach. There was no mention of the impact, no apology, no report filed, just a threat of disciplinary action and a $150 fine for the medallion. I was done playing polite. That frame, it wasn't rated for residential settings. The closure spring alone could shear bone if miscalibrated. But Marion didn't know I held the state record for residential safety failure testimony wins, 19 cases. She didn't know my work had been cited in the Reed versus Lockhart wrongful injury precedent, but she was about to. She thought she slammed the threshold on a medallion. She slammed it on a father. The next morning, the medallion was gone. I walked out to the porch at sunrise, coffee in hand, and the hook where it hung was empty. No note, no noise, just the ghost of it in the dirt below the planter, a spiderweb crack splitting the glaze where the sunlight used to catch. Vela didn't ask about it. She just stared at the porch from the window while she sipped warm water, her other hand never leaving the curve of her stomach. The bruise had already started to darken on her side, ugly and blotchy, shaped like the angle of the hinge. Her OB said the baby was stable, but we needed to monitor her for the next 72 hours. Any more trauma, any spike in blood pressure, and we'd be in delivery mode weeks too early. That same morning, a printed citation was rubber banded to our mailbox. Unauthorized object, second notice, immediate removal. Enforced, $150 fine incurred. There wasn't a first notice, they just wanted it gone. Later that day, a neighbor we barely knew, a woman named Callie 2 streets down, crossed the street without looking and muttered, "Sorry, but it's better not to push her. Marion's not worth it. She'll make it worse." Callie didn't make eye contact, just disappeared back behind her own perfect little hedgerow. Every house here had one. Same height, same trim, same HOA mandated stone mailbox. There were no fences in Thornbend Hollow, but the isolation was thick enough to choke on. The silence told me more than the HOA's letter ever would. They'd been through this before. At 2:30 p.m., I checked my email. A new message from Thornbend Board, Enforcement Division, sat at the top of my inbox. It was a violation record summary. The wording was strategic. Multiple breaches of community harmony, disruption of safety procedures, failure to respond to formal warnings. Failure to respond? There had been no conversation, just a slab slam and a hospital run. At the bottom of the message was a line I hadn't seen before. Pending review before board, behavior escalation protocol. They weren't trying to bury it. They were trying to flip it. I clicked through to the HOA portal and tried to view the board meeting schedule. Access denied. My login had been locked due to resident conduct under investigation. That's when I realized what they were doing. They were isolating us from the community backend. No digital access, no record review, no submission privileges. If I couldn't file a formal complaint, I couldn't trigger procedural review. They'd removed our voice before we even knew we were supposed to speak. But the mistake they made, the mistake they always make, is assuming silence equals surrender. I didn't need access to their system. I had something better. Pattern recognition. Thornbend was designed to give the illusion of luxury through rule-based order. It wasn't about value. It was about perceived control. The HOA ran on the currency of fear, not fines. And if that fear wasn't fresh, it stopped working. That's why people like Marion had to keep enforcing, even if the infractions were made up. She needed visible proof that power still belonged to her. But I had something she didn't. Data. And memory. And a profession built on proving negligence. The email confirmed it. She wasn't just denying the incident. She was preparing to erase it. My file was being rewritten before it could be submitted. A preemptive character assassination. It didn't matter that I wasn't angry. It didn't matter that I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't pushed the threshold, hadn't even argued back. All they needed was the headline, "Aggressive Resident Threatens HOA Officer." The medallion had been the bait. The frame was the trap. And now they were scrubbing the crime scene. I walked back inside and found Vela sitting on the edge of the couch, legs curled up, looking at the baby monitor like it might whisper a secret. Her face was still pale, and her body flinched every time she heard footsteps outside. "I'm going to fix this," I said. "Not just for us, for everyone she's done this to." She didn't say anything, just nodded once and closed her eyes. In that silence, I made the decision. Marion wanted to turn this into a records game. Fine, I'd play. But I wouldn't be using words. I'd be using physics, force analysis, safety thresholds, building codes. And once I proved what that door did, and what it was made to do, there'd be no erasing it. Orrin Bexley didn't look like the kind of man who'd flinch under pressure, but he flinched when I walked into the HOA maintenance bay. It was a converted garage behind the community office. Building, the kind of place that smelled like new caulk and old apologies. A few metal cabinets lined the wall, organized but unlabeled, and a battered workbench sat under a flickering LED light. He was leaning over a clipboard, scribbling something, until he saw me. He straightened immediately, eyes darting to the back slab. "You're not supposed to be in here, Mr. Rusk," he said. "That's board policy." "Good thing I'm not here for the board," I replied. "I'm here for a conversation." He hesitated. I could see the muscles in his jaw clench. Orrin was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, but the creases in his face had settled like someone who'd spent too long keeping things to himself. Maintenance uniform, HOA badge clipped to the collar, and boots that didn't belong to someone who sat in meetings all day. He looked like he built things once, probably still did. But whatever spine he had, Marion Vexley had bent it. "She said you were preparing a civil suit," he muttered, "that you're trying to smear the board. She's trying to rewrite an assault into a policy dispute. I'm trying to stop that from becoming permanent." He swallowed hard, but didn't move. "She also said your wife faked the fall," I added, letting it hang there just long enough to twist. His shoulders dropped like I'd cut the strings holding him upright. "I didn't sign up for this," he said, almost too low to hear. "I maintain the irrigation systems, paint mailboxes. That's supposed to be the job." I stepped closer but kept my voice even. "That frame, the one she slammed on my wife, it's not standard residential hardware. It's rated for commercial storefronts. Steel core, 15-pound torque spring. You install those in public buildings, not HOA offices. You know that." His eyes flicked toward the clipboard in his hands. I followed his glance, just long enough to catch the corner of an order sheet, typed and stamped, "Rush replacement, storefront steel, model 2ZTRS. I didn't touch it, didn't need to. "She told me to skip the inspection," he said finally. "Said it was just a placeholder until the newer office wing is finished, that it'd only be there 6 months. And the safety compliance tag was never issued." His voice cracked on that last word, as if saying it aloud turned him into a co-conspirator. I didn't press, I didn't have to. The guilt was already eating him alive. "She overrode the normal channels," he continued. "Said if I flagged it, she'd say I misordered the wrong part. I've got emails, timestamps. It's all in the internal drive, but I can't—" "She's your aunt," I said. He winced. "She's family, but that doesn't mean she's right." Silence settled between us, thick and clunky. "I need access to those logs," I said. "If I can prove the door's torque exceeded the ADA-compliant force threshold, it stops being a civil matter and becomes a mechanical injury case, a real one the county can't ignore." He didn't respond right away, just stared at the metal floor drain like it held some answer. Then quietly, "I'll think about it." That wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. By the time I stepped out of the maintenance bay, the afternoon light had turned gold and flat across the pavement. The wind caught the loose edge of a banner on the HOA building that read, "Thornabend Hollow, Harmony Through Order." It snapped twice, then fell still. Back at the house, Vela was asleep on the couch, one arm wrapped around her belly like she was trying to hold gravity in place. I sat beside her and opened my laptop. No access to the board portal, no access to my resident dashboard, no appeal tools. But I didn't need any of that anymore. What I needed now was proof. Physical thresholds, installation records, product specs. And Orrin Bexley, conflicted or not, had just shown me where the cracks were. The violation notice on our porch the next morning wasn't printed on standard HOA letterhead. It was hand-delivered, red-stamped, and sealed in a clear envelope, like evidence. Enforcement action, resident noncompliance escalation, effective immediately. Below the header, the wording was surgical. Pending disciplinary review, Mr. and Mrs. Rusk are restricted from attending community board meetings, accessing resident platforms, or submitting formal grievances until a full behavioral audit is completed. Additional fines will accrue daily for non-removal of unapproved installations. They'd locked us out completely. No meetings, no voice, no appeals. And the fines, $300 per day now, doubled from the original citation. Retroactively applied from the week we moved in. I stood on the porch in my work boots, reading each line while the morning sun skimmed the ridge. Across the cul-de-sac, the neighbor who always waved at us now stared through his curtains instead. A woman on her morning walk crossed to the opposite sidewalk without looking up. The message was loud. "You've been marked." Inside, she was sorting through insurance documents, her brow furrowed as she tried to match coverage codes to our recent hospital visit. The bruising along her side had darkened into an ugly, blooming purple. She winced when she leaned forward, but didn't say a word. "They're escalating," I said, dropping the notice on the table. She didn't look at it. "They've locked us out of the resident dashboard and blocked appeal access. It's not just retaliation now, it's strategic isolation. They're trying to make us look unhinged," she said quietly. "Like we're the ones disrupting their little system. That's exactly what it was. Psychological warfare dressed up as policy. I opened my laptop. My engineering software booted slowly. Aging hardware, but reliable. I navigated to the force analysis simulator I use for accident reconstruction and imported the generic specs for a Model 2ZTRS steel core storefront door. The torque spring data matched what I remembered from the field, built for high-traffic public buildings, not private community offices. The closing force exceeded 17 foot-pounds at full swing. I adjusted for angle, added a 1.2-second close time, factored Vela's standing position based on my diagram, and watched the impact vector render on screen. The simulation marked the point of contact at a height exactly consistent with the bruising on her lower abdomen. It confirmed what I already knew. The threshold wasn't just the problem, the frame was a weapon. By midday, I had a list of state and federal compliance codes that Marion had violated just by having it installed. ADA standards, residential safety ordinances, and Section 404.2 of the Oregon Residential Building Code all outline thresholds this slab exceeded by a wide margin. But legal theory wasn't enough. I needed physical evidence. That afternoon, I made my way back to the maintenance building. The exterior cameras made it impossible to enter unnoticed now, so I didn't try. Instead, I waited in the alley behind the HOA office until I heard footsteps echoing on the other side of the roll-up door. Orrin emerged a minute later, toolbox in hand, clipboard under one arm. He didn't stop when he saw me, just slowed, glanced around, and said quietly, "She's ordering replacements for the slab next week. Going to swap it out before your complaint gains traction." "She's trying to erase the installation," I said. "She's already deleted the order confirmation from the shared drive. But she forgot one thing. Every hardware requisition gets logged by the supplier, not just us. I flagged the purchase under Community Emergency Compliance, so it had to be filed externally. They'll still have a record of the part, the delivery, and the install time. You didn't have to do that. She doesn't get to lie about what that threshold did." I exhaled slowly. "She's going to come after you." He nodded once. "She already has. Might as well make it worth it." I didn't thank him. There wasn't time. That night, while she slept, I filed a formal inquiry with the State Office of Residential Safety Compliance under my professional credentials. I attached the torque analysis, the angle diagrams, and the video render. I didn't name Orrin, not yet. But I logged the supplier's name and flagged the order metadata for trace validation. It wasn't a full takedown, but it was a breach. Marion had escalated the game. I had just changed the board. The supplier's voicemail was short, but it said everything I needed. "Mr. Rusk, we've pulled the order under reference code 7128 HORC. It confirms shipment and delivery of the Model 2ZTRS steel core frame to Thornbend Hollow HOA on the date you specified. Let us know if your legal team needs notarized copies." The voice belonged to someone who dealt with enough government jobs to know when something didn't smell right. I saved the message, exported it, and tagged it in 3 separate folders, one personal, one cloud-based, and one archived to a locked USB I kept hidden in the battery compartment of an old multimeter, just in case. The confirmation was ironclad. The threshold had been delivered, installed, logged under an emergency compliance exception that didn't exist. And now, with that metadata still alive on a third-party ledger, Marion couldn't bury it, even if she burned every file in the HOA office. That morning, I took Vela to her OB follow-up. The waiting room smelled like lemon cleaner and artificial lavender. She looked tired, worse than before, but she hadn't said much since the latest round of board threats came through the mail. "You don't have to keep carrying this," I said while we waited. "Let me handle the rest." "You're not just handling it," she said, eyes fixed on the wall. "You're building a case for every person she's ever walked over." Her voice didn't shake. That's how I knew it was real. Dr. Linth came in 20 minutes later, wearing the same tight-lipped expression she had the night of the impact. The bruising was still present, but lighter. The scans looked clean. The baby's heart rate held steady. But she made me step outside when she talked to my wife. When she came back out, she looked at me the way emergency responders look at someone they've met once too often. "You need to reduce stress exposure immediately," she said. "If that board or its members approach your wife in any way, file a protective order. Don't wait." I nodded, jaw tight. Back home, I dropped she off and headed straight to my workshop. It was barely more than a shed, retrofitted with a standing bench and some salvaged lab gear from my old contract days. I set up the same torque model I'd built on my laptop and loaded the data into my testing rig. It wasn't a courtroom simulation platform, but it would get me 90% of the way there. I adjusted the closing parameters, inserted a foam cylinder calibrated to simulate human abdominal tissue, and triggered the mechanical swing. The cylinder dented on contact. Internal pressure spiked, enough to mimic organ displacement and bruising, exactly like what my wife's scans showed. I repeated it 3 more times, shifting the angle each pass. All 3 produced deformation. All 3 fell outside acceptable safety margins for residential applications, and all 3 were time-stamped, recorded, and tagged with a laser rangefinder overlay. Then I ran the final sequence, side-by-side video of my test rig and the OB scan overlay, synced by strike point, annotated by timestamp. It wasn't just a reconstruction, it was a match. I uploaded the footage to a secure file vault, then reached out to a former colleague who'd gone independent 2 years ago. She'd transitioned to expert witness work and knew exactly how to review this kind of evidence for chain of custody compliance. I trusted her more than any lawyer. She responded in less than an hour. Footage is admissible under 7 Stutes D standards. Your method and materials meet Dober reliability. Peer review coming. I read her message 3 times. It was real now, not just theory, not just diagrams and angry thoughts behind a closed slab. The mechanism that hit my wife was now documented, replicated, and tied directly to medical injury. All I needed now was the trigger that linked it to Marion's deliberate negligence. The supplier had the order. The test had the force. And Oren, he still had the internal emails. My hands hovered over the keyboard, hesitating for the first time since this started. I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was building a weapon. I didn't sleep that night. The footage played over and over in my mind, her body folding, the cylinder crumpling, the echo of metal slamming where breath should have been. Every click of my hard drive felt louder than it should, like the evidence I'd built was pacing the room with me. At 2:14 a.m., I opened the secure vault again and ran the simulation one last time. I didn't need to, but I had to know, down to the last millisecond, what Marion Vexley had done. She hadn't just failed to install a compliant slab. She'd knowingly authorized a unit with force levels banned for single-family environments, bypassed inspection, and issued it under a false compliance code. The supplier's metadata had her initials in the delivery note, and I had the torque match. But it wouldn't be enough on its own. I needed her intent. Intent turned a mistake into a violation. It turned negligence into liability. And I didn't want a slap on the wrist. I wanted the full weight of the state behind this. Because she wasn't a footnote in some procedural file. She was the woman who had almost lost our child because a petty tyrant couldn't handle a ceramic son. The next morning, I found her in the nursery, sitting on the edge of the rocking chair we'd bought secondhand. She was cradling one of the blankets she'd knitted months ago, fingers tracing the loops like she didn't realize she was doing it. She emailed me, she said, without looking up. Marion. I froze. She said, if we withdraw any pending claims, the board would consider the matter closed. No fines, no escalation. I stared at her. She put that in writing? Vela nodded slowly. I forwarded it to your inbox. When I opened the email, I felt something settle inside me, something cold and final. Marion had overplayed her hand. The message was short, veiled with administrative language, but the threat was unmistakable. Stop pushing, or lose more than you already have. I archived it in 3 places. By noon, I was parked outside a nondescript warehouse on the industrial edge of town. The supplier's Oregon branch office operated out of a converted loading dock, tucked behind a fence of sun-bleached aluminum. I didn't call ahead. I just walked in and asked for their compliance manager by name. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from a broad-shouldered man in a collared shirt with Northwest Supply Co. embroidered above the chest pocket. His name was Leland Durr. He looked like someone who'd worked forklifts longer than he'd worked emails. I'm not here to start a war, I told him, but I need a copy of the physical work order for your delivery to Thornbend Hollow, including any digital trail linking it to internal notes from HOA personnel. He didn't flinch, just leaned back and scratched his cheek. Is this a legal thing? It's a liability thing, and it's going to court. He stood up, walked out of the room without saying a word, and came back 8 minutes later with a manila folder. Inside was a printed requisition slip, initialed by Orrin Bexley, with a note that read, "Install per Marian's directive. Skip inspection. Not staying permanent." I kept my hands off it. "Can I photograph this?" I asked. He nodded once. "Can I list you as the originating supplier?" "You already have." That night I compiled everything: the simulation, the torque thresholds, the OB report, the supplier note, Marian's email to her. Then I filed an incident report to the State Board for Housing and Structural Safety. I attached every document, every time-stamped file, every calibration readout, and I ended the summary with one sentence. Resident injury caused by deliberate installation of a non-compliant structural component by an HOA officer. Negligence verified, impact replicated, evidence secured. I hit submit. It was no longer just a complaint. It was a formal state record. Orrin called me just before dawn. He didn't say hello, just said, "You'll want to check your inbox," and hung up. I was already halfway to the laptop before the line went dead. My hands moved faster than my thoughts, adrenaline pushing the fatigue out of my joints. When the screen lit up, I saw the file. No subject line, just a zip folder titled NT HOA Door SEQ1. I opened it, 3 emails, 2 maintenance logs, 1 requisition note. The first email was from Marian Vexley to the HOA board, dated 2 weeks before the frame was installed. She labeled it Urgent Image Control. In it, she described how visible displays of disorder, like personal artwork, off-tone trim, or unauthorized cultural fixtures, were undermining Thornbend's branding. Then came the next, a private email to Orrin, time-stamped 3 days later. Install the 2ZTRS unit from Northwest Supply. No inspection. This is a visual dominance move, not a permanent asset. And the last, a message to the board just hours after her injury. It read, "Incident at the office. Frame it as misconduct. Preempt any claims. Block. Portal access and file behavior protocol. Must suppress." I stared at the screen. Orrin had just handed me the match, the kindling, and the camera that saw who struck the first spark. The 2 maintenance logs confirmed what I already suspected. No inspection was logged after the threshold install, and a field note marked Override was tagged under Marian's initials. The requisition note had her handwriting. She signed off with MV, Fast Track Install. It wasn't just a slab. It was a trap she set, knowing exactly what it could do. I forwarded the entire folder to my expert witness contact. 10 minutes later, she replied, "That's intent, that's suppression. And that's a direct liability line. I'll draft the affidavit tonight." I shut the laptop and sat in silence, staring out the window at the first light breaking over Thornbend Hollow. The neighborhood looked like a luxury postcard. Symmetrical lawns, identical hedges, no sound except for irrigation systems kicking on like synchronized breath. No one would guess how much rot was buried under all that clean. She stirred in the bedroom. I heard the shift of her weight, the creak of the mattress, the slight catch in her breath that meant the pain was still there. She hadn't complained once, not when they erased our portal access, not when the board letters started doubling their threats, not when the bruising on her side made it hard to sit upright. She shouldn't have had to be strong, but Marian had turned our home into a war zone. By mid-morning, I was at the county clerk's office, printouts in hand. The woman behind the window was polite, if a little bored, until I slid the documents under the glass. Her eyes scanned the requisition note, then the override log. "You're filing as a resident?" "As a certified accident reconstructionist acting on behalf of an injured party," I said. She didn't ask for clarification, just slid a new form across the glass and pointed to the highlighted sections. "Do you want expedited administrative review?" "Yes." "There's a fee. I'll pay it." She stapled the documents together and stamped the top page with a sound that hit like a verdict. "You'll receive confirmation once it's assigned to a case officer." Outside, the wind picked up for the first time in days. Leaves stirred along the edges of the sidewalk. I stood at the edge of the parking lot, watching the clouds shift in slow, heavy arcs. Then I made one more call to my state certification bureau. I wasn't just going to present this as evidence. I was going to sign it under oath. By the time I got home, Orrin had texted me a single line. "She knows I leaked. I didn't reply. He'd done the one thing no one else had been willing to do in that place. He told the truth. The affidavit came through that night, 3 pages, precise, clinical. It outlined the force model, the test apparatus, the supplier's compliance confirmation, and the injury correlation, each section signed and dated by my expert witness, with attached credentials and chain of custody statements. I read it twice, then forwarded it to my attorney with a short note. Ready to file. The second copy I printed and sealed in a fireproof envelope. That one would go in a safety deposit box the next morning, because we weren't just fighting for the HOA to acknowledge wrongdoing, we were positioning this for a courtroom, and Marion Vexley had no idea how far I was willing to take it. By morning, I had 3 tasks. First, file the affidavit formally through the county clerk's system. That would attach it to the existing injury report and escalate it into a legal investigation under the state structural negligence protocols. It also meant Marion couldn't quietly swap the door without triggering evidence tampering. Second, finish the final calibration overlay. I wanted the strike point from the video simulation to align perfectly with the OB's fetal displacement scan. If it passed peer review, it wouldn't just be admissible, it would be irrefutable. And third, prepare for the HOA's response, because it was coming. The first crack showed up in the form of a letter slid under our front slab around 10 a.m. No envelope, no postage, just a printed sheet left like a threat. Resident disruption notification, immediate correction requested. It accused us of creating distress within the community, of broadcasting defamatory claims against board members, and of unpermitted investigation into HOA infrastructure. That last line was the one that made me smile. They knew. Inside the HOA building, someone was scrambling, trying to recenter control before the narrative slipped out of their hands. But I wasn't chasing a narrative. I was building a structure, one they couldn't burn down because it lived in copies, reports, scans, and verified timestamps. Around noon, Orrin called again. This time his voice was flat. She confronted me in the break room, he said. Told me I'd be suspended without pay pending investigation. You still have access to internal logs? Not for long. She's locking files behind personal credentials. Board voted this morning to move all enforcement-related documents to a secure admin server. How much did you already pull? I've got enough, he said. More than enough. You sure about this, Orrin? There was a long silence. She threatened to tell my dad I betrayed the family. That landed harder than I expected. She said he'd disown me, said he'd side with her. I didn't respond right away. I'm not doing this for you anymore, he added. I'm doing it for her, for her. Then the line went dead. I stood in my garage for a long time, holding the phone, thinking about how easy it would have been to let this slide, to take the apology that would never come, to disappear into silence, like every neighbor who looked the other way when Marion passed by. But every part of this neighborhood, the hedges, the rules, the fake smiles, was built on the assumption that no one would ever push back hard enough to matter. And now, someone had. By dusk, I had the overlay complete. The fetal injury scan, the torque simulation, the supplier confirmation, the emails, the affidavit, the requisition forms, the pressure model footage, the witness statement. Everything lined up. The model didn't just show injury, it showed preventable, deliberate force. I burned 5 copies to encrypted flash drives, 1 for the county, 1 for my attorney, 1 for state code enforcement, 1 for the Department of Consumer Protection, and 1, sealed in a padded envelope, went into the glove compartment of my car, in case they tried to make this disappear, in case they made Orrin vanish from the record, in case they decided that one child's safety wasn't worth admitting they were wrong. This wasn't about revenge, it was about protection, and I was done letting them define what harm looked like. The night before the filing, I found she in the nursery again. She was sitting in the rocking chair, cradling a stuffed lion her sister had mailed weeks before the incident. The room was nearly finished, soft light, mint green trim, no clutter. Peaceful, except for the shadow of what had happened just outside its threshold. She didn't look up when I entered, but her voice was steady. She knows Galen, Marion. She's watching the house. How do you know? She sent a certified letter, not to me, to my OB. I stared at her. She accused me of fabricating my injuries for sympathy, Vela said. She claimed you staged the door impact to sabotage the HOA. The heat rushed into my chest so fast it made my teeth clench. I took a breath, let it settle. Marion was spiraling, and we were getting too close for her to keep quiet. I filed the affidavit at 9:03 a.m. sharp. Clerk's stamp, chain of custody logged, digital copy submitted to the State Residential Safety Board. The woman behind the desk gave me a second look as I handed over the thumb drive. "You're Galen Rusk?" "Yes. We were told to expect this. You're not the only one watching that community." I didn't ask what she meant. I just turned and walked out, because the avalanche had already started. 2 hours later, I was sitting at my workshop bench, going over each flash drive to double-check encryption integrity, when a knock came at the side slab. Not the front, not the porch. The side. I opened it slowly, one hand still inside the drawer beneath the bench. Oren stood there, breathing like he'd jogged uphill, sweat along his collar, file folder under one arm. "She's prepping a vote to dissolve the safety subcommittee," he said, claiming it's duplicative oversight that wastes HOA funds. "She's trying to bury every mention of the door under budgetary noise. Is she threatening you again?" "Doesn't have to. 2 other board members already caved." He handed me the folder. Final maintenance docket from the day the frame was installed, original part numbers, signatures, and the rejection notice from our contracted safety inspector. Marion marked it as non-applicable. That's the paper trail they thought they deleted. I opened the folder and skimmed. There it was, clear as day, rejected stamped on the safety line, with a second entry reading, "Override MV per expedited request." She put her initials next to it. She always does when she thinks no one will read it. I looked at him. "This is enough. Between this and the Torquay data, we're past internal violations. She's going to come after you harder now. I know. You might lose your house. She already tried to take my kid." That quieted the air between us. He didn't speak again for a long moment. Then he said, "There's a board meeting tomorrow night. Marion wants to push a revised enforcement clause, new language, retroactive authority. If she passes that, she'll try to nullify everything we've submitted." "She'll try?" I placed the folder next to the flash drive stack, then stood still for a moment, hands on the bench. "I'm going public," I said. "Local news? No. State level, structural oversight agency first, legal advocacy group next. This isn't about my property anymore. It's about what happens when someone in power decides they're the law. You're going to expose the whole HOA. Only the parts worth burning." He gave a slow nod, then stepped back. "See you at the meeting," he said. "You'll want a front row seat." By the time he left, I'd already started drafting the packet for the Department of Consumer Protection. It would go out with everything: email chains, dockets, Torquay analysis, affidavit, and the injury report. The submission system asked for one final field: statement of intent. I typed, "To ensure no other family has to calculate the force of a lie after the damage is done." The meeting room smelled like disinfectant and power. Every chair was spaced with surgical precision, rows of neutral beige folding seats aimed at the front dais, like we were all here to witness some sacred ritual. The room was never meant to hold conflict, just compliance. I could see it in the design: low ceiling tiles, dull wall colors, a podium with a wireless mic that didn't quite reach the edge of the stage. The HOA wanted submission, not discussion. Marion Vexley sat dead center at the long table beneath the Thornabend Hollow seal, her hands folded over a thick binder. She wore cream again. No badge, just quiet authority. A woman who believed she was untouchable because she'd never been challenged by someone who knew how systems fail. But tonight, she wasn't the one with the upper hand. Oren sat, 4 seats down from her, stiff-backed, eyes forward. He didn't glance at me as I walked in. He didn't need to. We were past that now. The room filled slowly, residents trickling in, murmuring as they saw me. Some avoided my eyes, others whispered behind clipped hands. No one waved. At 7:02 p.m., Marion tapped the mic. "We'll begin with Item 1, Community Harmonization Guidelines, then proceed to Item 2, Updated language regarding HOA enforcement protocols, including clarifications on structural compliance and board discretion. Mr. Bexley, please confirm quorum." Oren's voice barely rose above the silence. "Confirmed." Item 1 passed without debate. Then came Item 2. Marion cleared her throat and began reading from a printed statement. The words were polished, legalistic. Buried in the middle was the clause she wanted most. The HOA board retains full authority to retroactively authorize any installation, action, or procedural decision taken in the interest of community safety or visual conformity. It was a shield, one big enough to block everything we'd uncovered. I stood. The board hasn't been granted that power, I said. Not under the original bylaws, not under Oregon's residential HOA statutes. Marion didn't flinch. You're out of order, Mr. Rusk. Residents are only permitted to speak during open forum. I held up the printed torque simulation and supplier order, clipped together in one clear packet. I've submitted evidence to the State Residential Safety Board, Consumer Protection Bureau, and County Clerk. Your motion attempts to retroactively legalize a mechanical hazard that caused documented injury. You are not out of legal reach. Gasps stirred through the back rows. Marion leaned forward slightly. You're not a structural attorney, Mr. Rusk. No, I said. I'm the person who built the test rig that recreated the injury. I'm the person who filed the affidavit. And I'm the person whose wife had to be treated for placental trauma because you installed a threshold that violates 3 different safety codes. Orrin slid a flash drive across the table, right toward the chair beside her. I've already submitted the internal emails, he said, loud enough for the room to hear. The override logs, the maintenance notes, they're entered into public record as of noon today. Marion's jaw moved, but no sound came out. Then someone in the back stood. Callie. Neighbor, walker, whisperer. I want to motion that we table the vote indefinitely, she said, voice trembling but steady. I don't consent to retroactive power used to cover harm, not when a child was at risk. Another resident stood, then another. The room shifted. Marion tapped the mic again, but this time it gave a sharp feedback screech that made her flinch. I remind everyone, she said, voice cracking, that this board has the legal authority to— No, I said. You don't, not anymore. I walked to the center of the aisle, unfolded the Torx analysis on the floor, and pointed at the frame-by-frame photos of the test simulation. Slab swing, pressure deformation, matching OB scan overlay. This is the point where it stopped being a rule dispute, I said. This is the point where it became assault. Silence swallowed the room, not because they didn't believe me, but because they did. The silence in the boardroom didn't last. It cracked under the weight of movement, chairs scraping, murmurs rising, the invisible pressure of residents realizing they'd just witnessed something irreversible. Not a complaint, not a heated exchange, but a statement of record. Marion's hands hovered over her binder like she couldn't decide whether to grab it or slam it shut. Her face, always so carefully controlled, had gone waxy with disbelief. She leaned toward the mic, but someone beat her to it. I moved to suspend the vote until an independent review is completed. It was Callie again. Her voice didn't tremble this time. A man from the back, one I'd never seen before, stood up and seconded it without hesitation. Marion tried to cut in, but the HOA's bylaws were working against her. Once a suspension motion was introduced and seconded, the board had to acknowledge it publicly before proceeding, and this room, her room, was no longer leaning her way. She turned to Orrin. Are you seriously allowing this? Orrin didn't look at her. He looked at the flash drive in front of him. The evidence is credible. The injury is real. The override was yours. You ungrateful little— He cut her off. This meeting is being recorded. That froze her. For a few beats, no one moved. Then she did something I didn't expect. Marion stood, slowly, carefully, as if her authority had turned brittle in her hands and she didn't want to break it too fast. This is a coordinated defamation campaign, she said, her voice controlled but tight. A resident with a grudge has used his technical background to generate biased evidence in order to discredit this board. I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I turned to face the crowd. My name is Galen Rusk. I'm a state-certified biomechanical reconstructionist. I've been hired in cases involving aircraft turbine failure, autonomous vehicle crashes, and commercial infrastructure collapses. I've testified in front of judges who've ruled on billion-dollar liability claims. I know when an injury is accidental. I held up the torque overlay, the injury scan, the supplier docket. And I know when it's not, A low hum of voices rippled across the room. "You're grandstanding," Marion snapped. "No," I said. "I'm submitting." I walked to the edge of the dais and placed 3 copies of the evidence packet on the table, one for each remaining board member. Not the scanned files, not the USB. Physical pages, numbered, stamped, bound with chain of custody cover sheets. "The state already has these," I said, "but now you do too." She laughed once, dry, hollow. "You think this is how it works? You think policy gets rewritten because you walked in with a printer and a grudge?" "No," I said. "I think it gets rewritten because a court doesn't care how well your hedges are trimmed." Orrin pushed his chair back and stood. "As acting facilities coordinator, I'm submitting my resignation to the board effective immediately. My replacement can access the internal server logs. I've already backed them up." He walked down the aisle, not looking at her, and stopped at my side. "I also recommend that the board's emergency meeting minutes from July 3rd be re-reviewed by outside counsel, specifically the parts that authorized override of structural installations under non-traceable discretionary action." Someone gasped. Marion's composure shattered. "Fine," she said, practically hissing. "Let the state look. Let the media come crawling. All they'll find is a man exploiting his wife's injury to turn a petty violation into a lawsuit." I didn't move. "I don't need to defend my wife," I said quietly. "You already made her case for her when you slammed that frame." Callie stood again. "I motioned for a full board review of leadership roles pending investigation." This time, half the room raised their hands. Not one of them was mine. It didn't have to be, because I'd already shifted the weight, and Marion was standing on the wrong side of the fault line. Marion didn't show up to the next board meeting. Her nameplate was still there, centered beneath the Thornabend seal, but the chair sat empty. No statement, no resignation, just an absence heavy enough to be a confession. 3 days after the confrontation, the county issued an official notice. An investigation into HOA leadership conduct and residential safety violations had been opened. The report named 2 individuals, Marion Vexley and an unnamed board co-signer, both flagged for possible criminal liability, related to the negligent installation of non-compliant structural hardware, resulting in injury to a pregnant resident. They didn't need to mention her by name. Everyone in Thornbend Hollow already knew who they meant. The ceramic sun medallion was returned in a paper bag. No note, no apology. Just left on our porch like some trinket that no longer held value. It had cracked in 3 places, but she didn't react when I pulled it out. She just stared at it for a while, then whispered, "Let's hang it up again." So we did. Not on the porch this time, but in the nursery right above the crib, where the morning light could catch it through the blinds. The baby was still holding steady. No complications in the final stretch. Dr. Linth said her strength had been unreasonable in the best possible way, and that if things stayed stable, we might even make it full term. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. The HOA, under pressure from both the county and the community, held an emergency vote. Orrin was nominated as interim chair by unanimous consent. Yes, even Callie voted for him. 1 board member resigned outright. The others agreed to a third-party audit of every enforcement citation issued over the past 2 years. Most of the neighborhood didn't speak to us directly, but they stopped crossing the street to avoid us. The silence had shifted. It wasn't fear anymore. It was acknowledgement. We'd survived something they all understood too well. The threshold that nearly crushed my family was removed under court order. The replacement? A soft-close, ADA-compliant unit with visible torque adjustment markings and a posted inspection certificate that couldn't be altered without triggering a violation from the state. I inspected it myself. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't need it. Because this was never about revenge. It was about proving that safety shouldn't depend on silence, that no title, no clipboard, no HOA badge could justify endangering a child or weaponizing policy to hide it. I had used every tool I had, force mapping, supplier logs, safety codes. But what made it all work wasn't the data. It was the decision to act, to not let it slide, to not let someone like Marion rewrite reality to fit her ego. And for those of you who've been through something similar, or who are still in the thick of it, dealing with intimidation behind gates and policies, know this: you're not crazy for fighting back. You're not overreacting for documenting everything, and you're absolutely not alone. Because these kinds of stories, they're everywhere, hidden behind manicured lawns and smiling newsletters. And sometimes it only takes one measured blow to bring the whole structure into view. If you're watching this from a neighborhood like mine, where the rules are used as weapons and silence feels like the only option, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your state, your street name, or just a dot. Someone else might be going through it too.